The weight of doubt settled deep in Todd's chest like a heavy stone. It had started as nothing, just a fleeting thought, a whisper of paranoia that he had tried to push away. But paranoia doesn't leave when it finds something to feed on. It grows, it multiplies, and soon it consumes everything. Suzanne was perfect, too perfect. The kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room, who knew exactly what to say, how to smile, how to make someone feel like the center of the universe. Todd had been one of those people once, the guy who thought he had won the lottery when she chose him. But lately something had shifted. There were moments, small ones, barely noticeable, when he felt like he was looking at a stranger. Maybe it was the way she hesitated before answering simple questions. Maybe it was the way she held her phone just a little too tightly, the way her laugh felt forced when they were alone. Or maybe it was nothing at all. Maybe he was losing his mind. Todd wanted to believe he was wrong. He wanted to believe that the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he was about to marry, was exactly who she claimed to be. But then there were the nights when she would disappear into the other room to take a call, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. There were the sudden errands, the unexplained absences, the late nights where she swore she was with her bridesmaids, but something in her eyes said otherwise. And then there was the moment that changed everything. A few weeks before the wedding, Todd had come home early from work. Suzanne wasn't expecting him. He had walked in quietly, setting down his keys, ready to call out to her. But before he could, he heard her voice. Low, urgent. He froze. "Not now," she was saying. "I told you it's risky." A pause. "I can't just drop everything. It's complicated." Todd's pulse quickened. He strained to hear more, but all he caught was a quiet, "I'll see you soon," before the call ended. The moment she stepped out of the room and saw him standing there, something flickered across her face. Just for a second. Panic. Fear. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced with that perfect, effortless smile. "Hey, babe," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. "You're home early." And just like that, Todd knew. Doubt turned to certainty. Certainty turned to rage. But rage wasn't enough. He needed proof. Todd didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he played along. He smiled. He kissed her. He pretended that nothing had changed. But inside, something dark was growing. He started watching more closely, noticing the details he had ignored before. The way she angled her phone away from him. The way she suddenly became protective of her privacy. The way she would disappear into the bathroom for just a little too long, phone in hand. One night when she was asleep, Todd made his move. He reached for her phone, his heart hammering against his ribs. His fingers hovered over the screen. A simple passcode stood between him and the truth. He took a deep breath and tried the first thing that came to mind. Her birthday. Incorrect. His birthday. Incorrect. Something colder than fear settled into his bones. He tried again. The day they met. The day they got engaged. Her mother's birthday. Each time the phone remained locked. Suzanne had changed her password. Todd set the phone back down and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some baseless fear. This was real. And he was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Todd couldn't sleep that night. His mind was too full of questions, each one sharper than the last. Why had Suzanne become so distant? Why the secrecy? The lies? Was she having an affair? Who was this person that she had become? Every scenario played out in his mind, each one darker than the last. But what haunted him most was the nagging feeling that he was missing something crucial. Maybe it wasn't the late-night calls. Maybe it wasn't the secretive behavior. Maybe it was something more subtle, something even more dangerous. As the days passed, Todd's obsession with uncovering the truth grew. He wasn't just looking for answers anymore. He was hunting for them. Todd knew Suzanne would be at her mother's house that Saturday. She had told him days before that she was going to help her mom with something. Todd saw it as the perfect opportunity to dig deeper. He had already tried accessing her phone, but the password block was a roadblock he couldn't break through. His next step was to go after something more personal, something she wouldn't expect him to use. He made his way to her office, a small, cluttered room at the back of their apartment. Her diary. It had always been there, sitting innocently on the desk. Todd had never looked at it before. Suzanne had always been open with him. Too open, perhaps. But now in the quiet of their apartment, it felt like the only way to get the answers he was desperately searching for. Todd flipped through the pages, his heart racing with each word he read. It was filled with details about their relationship, her plans for the wedding, thoughts on their life together. But then, there it was, an entry that stopped him dead in his tracks. Tonight was amazing. I couldn't believe how much I missed him. But I have to be careful. Todd is too trusting. The words hit Todd like a slap in the face. His hands trembled as he read further. We have a future together, but what if he finds out the truth? What if it all falls apart? Todd slammed the diary shut, his mind spinning. He was no longer just a man suspicious of his fiancée. He was a man whose entire world was about to come crashing down. Todd didn't confront Suzanne immediately. No, he needed more. He needed the truth, something undeniable, something that would shatter her facade forever. He decided to take a more direct approach. If she wasn't going to be honest with him, he would force her to be. Todd had heard rumors, whispers from friends, mentions of a mysterious man in her life. A name had come up more than once. Brian. Todd didn't know who Brian was, but he was about to find out. He spent the next few days gathering information, following her every move. He checked her social media, scoured through her phone contacts, and even reached out to a few of her old friends. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Suzanne had been seeing someone, and Brian was the key. Todd's investigation led him to a hotel downtown, a secluded, upscale place that didn't seem like the kind of place you would go for a casual meeting. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the kind of lead that could shatter everything. Todd waited across the street, hidden in the shadows, his heart thumping with anticipation. He had to know. He had to see it with his own eyes. As the clock ticked by, Todd saw Suzanne's car pull up to the hotel entrance. His stomach tightened as he watched her step out, her expression a mixture of excitement and fear. She didn't look around, didn't check for any signs of her fiancé's presence. She simply walked inside. Todd's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment of truth. He waited for what felt like an eternity, his eyes glued to the door. Moments later, a man walked out of the hotel. Tall, dark-haired, confident. Brian. Todd had no doubt about it. The man got into a car, and Suzanne's voice could be heard as she stepped back into the hotel lobby. Todd's blood ran cold. The moment had arrived. Suzanne's lies were no longer just words on a page or whispers in the dark. They were real, and Todd was about to make sure she could never deny them again. Todd waited for her to return, his mind focused. He had no idea how he was going to confront her, what he would say, but he knew one thing. There was no turning back now. She had betrayed him. She had chosen someone else over him, and now he would make her face the consequences. That night, Suzanne returned to their apartment, smiling as if nothing had happened. Todd couldn't help but feel a deep sense of disgust wash over him as he looked at her. She had no idea what he knew. No idea that everything she had been hiding was about to be exposed. When Suzanne entered the living room, Todd didn't wait. He didn't hesitate. Who is Brian? Todd's voice was calm but cutting. It was the kind of question that demanded an answer, one that would either end the charade or shatter everything. Suzanne's face went pale. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for a way out. What are you talking about? She stammered. Todd didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes. Don't lie to me, Todd said, his voice suddenly louder. I saw you. I saw you with him today. What were you doing? Suzanne opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her lips trembled as she looked at Todd. You've been lying to me. You've been cheating on me, Todd continued, his voice breaking slightly as the pain flooded in. I watched you. I know everything. She broke down, her eyes filled with tears, her perfect facade crumbling in an instant. She fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. But Todd had already made his decision. I can't do this, Todd said, his voice steady. You've betrayed me in ways I can't even begin to understand. There's nothing left to say. He walked past her, his heart heavy, but his resolve unshakable. Suzanne's sobs echoed in the room, but Todd didn't turn around. He couldn't. As he left the apartment, The weight of the truth finally settled into his bones. Suzanne's betrayal wasn't just about another man. It was about her deceit, her manipulation, and the years of lies she had built their relationship on. And as Todd walked into the unknown, he realized that sometimes the only way to heal was to let go, to walk away. The days that followed were filled with silence. Todd had left their apartment, gone to stay with a friend, and refused to answer Suzanne's calls. He had done what he thought was best, removed himself from the situation, taken the time to breathe, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. But no amount of distance could silence the storm inside him. The pain, the anger, the betrayal, every emotion hit him harder than he could ever have imagined. Suzanne had been his world, the person he thought he would spend the rest of his life with. How could she have done this to him? Todd found himself walking through the city streets aimlessly, his mind consumed with thoughts of her. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't escape the fact that he had loved her completely, with every fiber of his being, and yet she had chosen someone else. But there was a small part of him, a part that hadn't fully died yet, that wondered if there was any chance of fixing this. Could forgiveness be a possibility? Could he ever look at Suzanne the same way again? Suzanne finally stopped calling, stopped texting. The silence between them stretched on for days, and for a while Todd thought he might be able to find peace in it. But then one evening, a message arrived. It was from Suzanne. "I know what I did. I know I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need to say one thing. I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to lose you." Todd stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Every word cut deeper, every sentence more painful than the last. She was still trying to hold on, still trying to make him understand. But Todd knew there was nothing left to say. She had crossed a line that he couldn't come back from. The next day he made his decision. Todd stood in front of Suzanne's apartment building, feeling the weight of his decision pressing on him. He had to do this. He had to see her one last time, to say what needed to be said. As he walked up to the door, his heart beat faster. This wasn't going to be easy. Nothing about this would be easy. But sometimes you have to face the hardest truths in order to move on. He knocked. The door opened, and there she was, Suzanne standing before him, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She had been waiting for this moment. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly, her voice shaky. "But please, Todd, just hear me out. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Todd looked at her for a long moment. His heart wavered, but he knew he couldn't go back. "No, Suzanne," he said, his voice steady, though the weight of his words felt like they were crushing him. "You can't undo what you've done. You can't make it right." The words hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Suzanne's shoulders trembled as she sank to her knees, sobbing. "I love you, Todd. I always have," she pleaded, reaching out for him. "Please don't walk away from me. Please don't leave me like this." But Todd didn't move. "I can't be with you anymore," he said, his voice firm. "I have to let go. I have to move on." Suzanne's sobs grew louder, her cries echoing in the empty apartment. But Todd couldn't change his mind. He had already made his peace with the decision, even if his heart was still breaking. "I wish I could say it didn't hurt," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I know I'll be better off without you. We both will." With those final words, Todd turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Suzanne behind. As he stepped into the cold night air, a sense of clarity washed over him. It wasn't just about revenge or anger. It was about reclaiming his life. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also set him free. In the weeks that followed, Todd focused on rebuilding himself. He went to therapy, leaned on friends and family, and began to rediscover who he was without Suzanne. Slowly, he began to heal. The pain never fully went away, but he learned to live with it. One evening, as he sat on the rooftop of his friend's apartment, looking out at the city lights, Todd realized something. Life wasn't just about love. It was about resilience, about finding strength in the face of betrayal. And while the wounds Suzanne had inflicted on him would never fully disappear, he had learned to embrace the pain, to make it a part of his journey. As time passed, Todd grew stronger. He dated again, met new people, and rediscovered the parts of himself that he had buried for so long. Suzanne was a chapter in his life, but not the final one. And in the end, Todd learned that sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the greatest transformations. Years later, Todd would look back at that moment in Suzanne's apartment and realize that it was the catalyst for his change. It had been painful, devastating, and life-altering, but it had also been necessary. It had forced him to confront his own weaknesses, to face the darkest parts of his soul, and to come out stronger on the other side. And as he sat in his new apartment, surrounded by friends and family, Todd realized that no matter how much pain you endure, you always have the power to move forward. You always have the choice to rise above it. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself again, and that's when you discover the strength you never knew you had. Todd's life gradually shifted back into a rhythm. The weight of the past, once unbearable, had become a mere shadow, still present, but no longer as heavy. The quiet moments in the morning, when he'd wake up alone, no longer stung as they once did. The empty side of the bed had become a symbol of freedom, a place where he could lie without the memories of betrayal clouding his mind. But as time passed, Todd felt something stirring within him, a need to confront the past, to look back on the pain and acknowledge how it had shaped him. His friends noticed it too. He wasn't the same person he was before. He was stronger, more grounded, more sure of himself. He was becoming the man he had always wanted to be. He'd started to rebuild his career, focusing on work with renewed purpose, no longer driven by the thought of proving something to Suzanne, but by his own desire to succeed and find fulfillment in the things he loved. Yet every now and then, he would hear her name in passing, a mutual friend, a distant memory, a shared experience. And with every mention, Todd would find himself slipping into the past once more. The rawness of the emotion would catch him off guard, but he never let it hold him for long. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone, an unexpected message popped up. It was from Suzanne. "I've thought about you every day since we ended things. I know I don't deserve it, but I still hope one day we can talk. Not to go back, but to find peace. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you can at least find closure." Todd stared at the message. His first instinct was to ignore it, to delete it and move on. But there was something inside him, a curiosity, a need to understand. He didn't know what closure meant yet, but he knew he wasn't ready to fully close the door on this chapter of his life just yet. Todd sat there for a long moment, the message from Suzanne lingering in his mind. He didn't want to reopen old wounds, but part of him knew he needed to. Closure wasn't something he could rush. It was something that had to come from within. And if this was the only way to achieve it, then perhaps it was worth the discomfort. He typed a response, his fingers hesitant over the keys. What could he possibly say after all that had happened? "All right, let's talk." The words were simple, yet they carried more weight than he had intended. It wasn't about forgiveness or moving on. It was about understanding the past, understanding how they had both ended up here, in this painful and complex situation. A few days passed, and they finally arranged a meeting. Todd didn't know what to expect. He had spent so much time building his life without her in it, trying to forget what they had, that seeing Suzanne again seemed almost surreal. The day arrived, and he found himself standing outside a small cafe, his heart racing as he waited for her to arrive. When Suzanne walked in, Todd's breath caught in his throat. She hadn't changed much, still the same woman he had loved so deeply, but there was something different about her now, something raw and vulnerable. She looked at him, her eyes filled with hesitation and regret. "I didn't expect you to agree to meet me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Todd smiled faintly, though the gesture didn't quite reach his eyes. "Neither did I," he admitted. They sat down, the silence between them heavy and uncomfortable. For a few moments, neither spoke. Todd's mind raced, the questions he had asked himself over and over flooding his thoughts once more. Was this worth it? Was this really what he needed? Finally, Suzanne broke the silence. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness. I don't even expect you to look at me the same way again, but I need to tell you everything. I owe you that much." Todd looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Then tell me." Suzanne took a deep breath, and for the first time since the betrayal, She allowed herself to be completely honest with him. She told him everything, the affair, the lies, the manipulation. She didn't try to justify herself or explain her actions. She just laid it all out, bare and unflinching. "I was scared, Todd," she said, her voice trembling. "I was afraid of losing control. I was afraid of what our future might look like. And instead of confronting those fears, I ran. I ran into the arms of someone else." Todd listened, his face still, but inside his emotions were a storm. He felt anger, pain, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal all over again. But there was also something else, something unexpected. It was a kind of understanding. "I've always wondered why you did it," Todd said slowly, "why you would risk everything we had. And now, I think I understand. It wasn't about me. It was about you and your own fears." Suzanne nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Todd. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to destroy what we had." Todd sat back in his chair, processing her words. His mind was a whirlwind, but amidst the chaos, there was a strange sense of clarity. Suzanne had made her choices, and he had made his. This meeting, this conversation, had given him the answers he had been searching for. But it didn't change the fact that the past was irreparable. They couldn't go back to what they had. Too much had been lost, too much trust shattered. "I appreciate your honesty," Todd said finally, "but I can't forgive you. Not yet, maybe not ever. But this conversation was what I needed." Suzanne nodded, her face pale and stricken with guilt. She had known this was a possibility. She wasn't expecting Todd to forgive her. She had come for the same reason Todd had, to find peace, even if it wasn't with each other. As they parted ways that day, Todd felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The conversation wasn't a resolution, but it was a step toward healing. He didn't need Suzanne's forgiveness, and he didn't need her to make it right. What he needed was to forgive himself, to release the anger and pain that had consumed him for so long. He walked away from the cafe, feeling a sense of closure that he hadn't realized he had been seeking. The wounds would take time to heal, but they would heal, and perhaps in time, he would find someone who could love him without the lies, without the betrayal. For now, though, Todd was enough, and that was all that mattered. Days passed, and Todd's life seemed to settle into a new rhythm. It was a quiet peace. No more storms, no more turmoil. The weight of the past had started to feel like it belonged to someone else, not to him. He'd reclaimed control over his life, and he had learned a valuable lesson. He had survived. He had grown. And despite the pain, he had found strength in the scars Suzanne had left behind. But even as he moved forward, a part of him couldn't shake the questions that lingered. What was real? Was his relationship with Suzanne ever truly based on honesty? Or was it just an illusion, a story they had both told themselves until the lies unraveled? Those thoughts gnawed at him, pulling him back toward the past. But each time he reminded himself, it was over. Yet there was still something inside him that couldn't let go. It wasn't about Suzanne. It was about proving something to himself, that he wasn't the man he had been in that relationship, afraid, uncertain, drowning in someone else's chaos. He had the power to decide his future. One evening, Todd was out with his friends at a local bar. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the easy camaraderie, it was all a welcome distraction. For a few hours, he could forget about the past, forget about Suzanne, and just enjoy the present. It was during this night out that he met someone new. Her name was Emma. She was confident, smart, and unafraid to speak her mind. They hit it off instantly. Todd found himself laughing more than he had in a long time. Her presence, her warmth. It felt like a breath of fresh air. They exchanged numbers, and as the night ended, Todd couldn't help but feel something stir inside him. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was hope. A hope that perhaps he could start again, that he could find something real this time, something built on trust. But as he walked home that night, a familiar unease crept into his thoughts. He hadn't allowed himself to be vulnerable in a long time, and the thought of opening up to someone else, of trusting again, felt like a leap of faith he wasn't sure he was ready for. In the weeks that followed, Todd spent more time with Emma. They went on dates, had long conversations, and discovered shared passions and interests. She was everything Suzanne had not been: open, honest, and willing to meet him halfway. But even as things with Emma progressed, Todd couldn't ignore the lingering ghosts of his past. The fear of betrayal, of being manipulated again, haunted him. It was a constant battle within him, a battle he wasn't sure he could win. One evening, after a particularly intimate dinner, Emma noticed the shift in Todd. She had always been perceptive, and it didn't take long for her to see the hesitation in his eyes. She reached across the table, taking his hand gently in hers. "You're not fully here, Todd," she said softly. "I can see it in you. You're holding back. I get that you've been hurt, but you can't carry that forever." Todd looked down at their joined hands, his mind racing. Could he really let go of the past? Could he allow himself to trust again, to love without fear? "Emma, he started, but the words caught in his throat. It wasn't easy to open up, not after everything, but somehow with her, he felt it was possible. The next few weeks were a test. Todd worked hard to stay present with Emma, to give their relationship the space to grow. But every now and then, the old wounds would resurface. He'd find himself pulling away, retreating into the safe distance of solitude, afraid of getting too close. One evening after a particularly long day at work, Todd sat down to relax. He opened his phone and saw a message from Suzanne. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to tell you that I'm truly sorry. I think I've finally figured out what I need to do with my life. I've been selfish, and I know I hurt you, but I'm trying to make things right. I'm not asking for anything in return, just peace." Todd stared at the screen. It had been months since he had heard from her, and yet her words felt like a punch to the gut. He was surprised by how much they still affected him. He couldn't deny it. There was still a part of him that wanted to know the truth behind everything. Part of him wanted to understand why Suzanne had done what she did, why she had shattered their lives. But another part of him knew he didn't need those answers anymore. Suzanne's actions were no longer his responsibility to carry. It was her journey to fix, not his. He had his own life to live. He put the phone down, breathing deeply. Todd had moved on, and he needed to remind himself of that. He had learned from the pain, and now it was time to live without the weight of the past hanging over him. One afternoon, Todd met Emma for a quiet walk in the park. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the trees and the path they walked together. "I've been thinking," Todd began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "about everything. About Suzanne, about my past, about where I'm going. And I've realized something. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to carry the weight of what happened with her. I want to be free of it. I want to be with you, without all the baggage." Emma smiled, squeezing his hand. "You don't have to carry it alone, Todd. I'm here with you. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." And for the first time in a long time, Todd believed her. He had been given a second chance at happiness, and this time, he wouldn't let fear stop him from embracing it. As the days went by, Todd found himself settling into a life he hadn't thought possible just a few months ago. His relationship with Emma blossomed, each day bringing more trust and understanding between them. The pain of the past, while still a part of him, no longer defined him. He was no longer bound by the actions of Suzanne, no longer haunted by the shadows of betrayal. For the first time, he felt like he could truly breathe again. The emotional scars that had once seemed impossible to heal were now just memories, distant echoes of a time when he wasn't sure he would ever find peace. One evening, as he and Emma sat together on the couch, talking about their hopes and dreams, Todd felt a surge of gratitude. Life had a way of surprising him, of showing him that even in the most painful moments, there was room for growth and transformation. "I never thought I'd be here," Todd said softly, looking at Emma. "I never thought I'd be able to love again, not after everything that happened." Emma smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But you're here, and that's all that matters." The simplicity of her words struck him. It was true. He was here, and he wasn't alone anymore. But as life continued to move forward, Suzanne's shadow still loomed in the background. Todd had forgiven her, or at least he had tried to. Yet something inside him stirred when he received a letter from her. The envelope was plain, but the words inside were anything but. Suzanne wrote about her struggles, her attempts to rebuild her life, and the steps she was taking to make amends. There was a sense of sincerity in her words, a quiet plea for forgiveness that touched Todd in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't that he wanted to get back together with her. That chapter was closed, but there was something about her vulnerability, her acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, that made Todd question whether he had fully let go. He put the letter down, feeling conflicted. Was forgiveness truly possible? Could he offer Suzanne the peace she was seeking without reopening old wounds? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever he decided, it had to come from a place of strength, not obligation. Over the next few weeks, Todd's internal struggle deepened. He tried to focus on the life he had with Emma, the life he was building with someone who truly saw him, who accepted him for who he was. He loved Emma. She made him feel whole again, and for that, he was grateful. Yet there was still a part of him that needed closure with Suzanne, not for her sake, but for his own. He realized that he couldn't fully move forward until he had made peace with the past, until he had forgiven not just Suzanne, but himself as well. Todd knew he had to face this final piece of his journey. He needed to confront Suzanne one last time, not to seek answers or make demands, but to finally let go. The day came when he decided to write her back. It wasn't an easy letter to write, but he knew it was necessary. "Dear Suzanne," he began, his hand trembling as he wrote, "I don't know if forgiveness is something that can ever be fully achieved, but I have tried. I've tried to understand why things happened the way they did, and I've tried to forgive you. And in doing so, I've realized something important. I don't need to hold on to the past anymore. I need to move forward, and I need to do so without the weight of our history weighing me down. I hope you find the peace you're looking for, just as I've started to find mine." Todd paused for a moment, reading the letter over. It felt like a final release, a closing of a chapter he had been carrying for far too long. He sent the letter, knowing that it was the last step in his emotional journey. He didn't expect anything in return, but he knew that by letting go, he was finally free. The day after he sent the letter, Todd went on a long walk, taking in the sights of the city, reflecting on how far he had come. His relationship with Emma had blossomed, and he was no longer held back by the chains of the past. The journey wasn't easy, but it had taught him valuable lessons about trust, forgiveness, and self-worth. When he met Emma for dinner that evening, he felt different, lighter somehow, stronger. He had faced his past, confronted his fears, and emerged on the other side a better man. "I feel like a new person," Todd said as he sat down across from Emma, his eyes shining with a quiet confidence. Emma smiled, taking his hand. "You are, and you always were. You just needed to believe it." Todd chuckled, shaking his head. "I think I'm just starting to believe it now." The two of them spent the evening talking about their future, their hopes, and the life they wanted to build together. Todd knew there would still be challenges ahead. Life was never perfect, but for the first time, he was ready to face those challenges, not with fear, but with the strength that came from healing. He had learned that even in the face of betrayal, there was room for growth, and that growth, that strength, was something no one could take from him. As the weeks went by, Suzanne's name faded from Todd's thoughts. It wasn't that he had forgotten her, it was just that she no longer had the power to control his emotions. She was a part of his past, but she no longer dictated his future. Todd and Emma continued to grow closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. Their love was built on trust and understanding, and Todd knew without a doubt that this was what he had been searching for all along. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been filled with heartache, confusion, and betrayal. But it had also been a journey of self-discovery, of learning what it meant to truly forgive, to truly heal. And as Todd looked toward the future, he realized that he was no longer defined by the past. He was defined by who he had become, someone stronger, wiser, and more capable of loving than ever before. It was time to move forward, and for the first time in a long time, Todd was ready. As time passed, Todd's life continued to flourish in ways he never expected. His connection with Emma only deepened, becoming the foundation of his new reality. His healing journey was no longer just about letting go of the past, but about embracing the present and the future with an open heart. There was an undeniable joy in the simplicity of their life together, the way they laughed, the way they supported one another, and the way they communicated openly and honestly. Todd had learned to trust again, not just others, but himself. He had been through the darkest of times, but now, the light was something he had come to cherish. He felt truly alive, something he hadn't been able to say for a long time. Yet despite his newfound peace, there were still moments when he couldn't help but think back to Suzanne, especially when certain memories resurfaced, unbidden. He sometimes wondered if he had truly forgiven her, or if he had simply buried the pain too deep. These thoughts would come and go, like fleeting shadows, but they no longer had the power to control him. His life was no longer held hostage by the woman who had once broken his heart. One afternoon, as Todd and Emma were taking a walk through the park, a thought crossed Todd's mind, one that had been lingering there for a while. He realized that while he had moved on from his past with Suzanne, he still had to find a way to honor the lessons he had learned from that chapter. He didn't want to forget it completely, but he also didn't want it to be something that defined him anymore. He needed to strike a balance. "I've been thinking," Todd said as they strolled along, his voice thoughtful. Emma turned to him, giving him a curious look. "What about?" "I've been thinking about the past," he said, pausing for a moment to gather his thoughts. "About everything that happened with Suzanne. I don't want to forget about it, but I also don't want it to keep holding me back." Emma smiled gently, squeezing his hand. "It's part of who you are, Todd, but it's not all of who you are. You're more than just what happened to you." Todd nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It was the reminder he needed. The past had shaped him, but it didn't define him. With a renewed sense of clarity, Todd decided to take one last step in his healing process. He would no longer avoid the past, nor would he allow it to rule him. Instead, he would embrace the lessons it had taught him, using them to fuel his growth. He had come to understand that forgiveness wasn't just about the other person. It was about freeing oneself from the chains of anger and resentment. A few weeks later, Todd visited the place where everything had gone wrong, the church where his wedding to Suzanne had been meant to take place. It was a quiet, serene morning, and the church was empty, save for a few latecomers to the Sunday service. Standing at the altar, Todd allowed himself to fully process the emotions that had been trapped inside for so long. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't bitter. He was just free. It was a symbolic moment, one that marked the final closure he needed. And when he walked out of that church, it felt like a new chapter had begun. Not just for his relationship with Emma, but for his life as a whole. He had truly let go. The rest of the year passed in a whirlwind of happiness and growth. Todd's relationship with Emma blossomed further, and he found himself constantly amazed by the life they were building together. They made plans for the future, talked about getting married someday, and even discussed having children. Todd had come to realize that he didn't just want a life free of pain. He wanted a life full of love, joy, and meaningful connection. And Emma was the one with whom he wanted to share that life. As the holidays approached, Todd's heart was full, and he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He had gone from a man broken by betrayal to someone who had learned to love again. The thought of Suzanne no longer weighed on him. She had been a part of his story, but she was no longer the author of his fate. Todd was the one in control now. He had the power to create his own future. One day, while sitting with Emma in their cozy living room, Todd felt a sudden wave of gratitude. "I'm so lucky to have you," he said, his voice full of emotion. "You've helped me become the person I am today." Emma smiled warmly, placing a hand on his. "We've helped each other, Todd. That's what love is. Supporting each other through the good and the bad." Todd kissed her forehead gently, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had finally found his place in the world, and it wasn't in the past. It was in the present, with Emma, building a future that was his to create. As the new year approached, Todd and Emma celebrated quietly, surrounded by friends and family who loved them. It was a reminder that despite all the trials and tribulations he had faced, he was surrounded by people who cared for him and believed in him. For the first time in a long while, Todd felt truly at peace. His past had been tumultuous, but it had shaped him into the person he was meant to be. Suzanne's betrayal had been painful, but it had ultimately led him to a place of healing and growth. Todd had learned that the path to healing wasn't linear, nor was it easy. It required facing painful truths, forgiving others, and most importantly, forgiving oneself. But through it all, he had discovered a strength within himself that he never knew existed. And now, as he stood on the brink of a new chapter with Emma, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with resilience, love, and the unwavering belief that he was worthy of happiness. As the days turned into months, Todd and Emma's life together continued to grow in ways Todd had once thought impossible. The shadows of his past had gradually faded into the background, replaced by the radiant light of his present and future. They had created a home, a sanctuary of love and warmth, where trust was no longer a fragile thing, but the very foundation of their relationship. Yet no matter how much time passed, there were moments when Todd would pause, his thoughts drifting back to Suzanne. It wasn't that he wished to rekindle what was lost. It was more of a lingering curiosity about how she had turned out, how she had moved on from their tumultuous past. He found himself wondering if she ever regretted the decisions she made, if she ever thought about the life they could have had together. But he quickly reminded himself that the answers to those questions didn't matter anymore. He had moved on. He was happy. One afternoon, while Todd was at work, he received an unexpected message from Suzanne. It was brief, almost terse, but it held the weight of years between them. She wrote, "I know it's been a long time, but I think about what happened often. I'm sorry for everything. I've learned a lot." Todd stared at the message for a moment, a mixture of emotions flooding his chest. Anger, sadness, and confusion all collided within him. He had never expected to hear from her again, let alone receive an apology. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. After all, it was a relic of a past he no longer wanted to revisit. But something about it felt unfinished. He had spent so much time in the darkness of his own emotions. Would it be possible to find closure? Or would this only stir up old wounds? He typed back a simple response. "Thank you for the apology. I wish you all the best." That was all. It was polite, it was firm, but most importantly, it was free from any lingering emotion. It was a reflection of how far he had come. Later that evening, Todd and Emma sat down to dinner, and as he told her about the message, Emma listened intently, her eyes filled with understanding. She had always known the depths of Todd's past, had seen him struggle with his memories of Suzanne, and now she could see how far he had come. "You handled that well," Emma said, smiling warmly at him. "It's not easy when someone from the past reaches out like that." Todd nodded, pushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I just don't think there's anything left to say. I've learned everything I need to know from that chapter. I'm not going to let it hold me back anymore." Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm so proud of you." In the weeks that followed, Todd began to feel the weight of his past even more as he continued to move forward with his life. His career was flourishing, and his relationship with Emma seemed stronger than ever. They had made plans for their future, and he found himself genuinely excited about what lay ahead. But every so often, when he allowed himself to pause and reflect, Suzanne's name would come to the surface of his thoughts. He had made peace with her betrayal. He had forgiven her. But he had also realized that his true strength came from the way he had rebuilt himself from the ruins of their relationship. He hadn't let her actions define him. He had chosen to grow, to embrace love, and to trust again. As the seasons changed, so did Todd. He had shed the man he was when he had first been betrayed. He had become someone new, stronger, wiser, and more at peace with himself than he had ever been before. And through it all, Emma was by his side, a constant source of support and love. One night after a particularly long day at work, Todd and Emma sat on the couch together, enjoying the quiet of their home. Todd leaned back, closing his eyes, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. It was in these moments of stillness that he realized how far he had come. From the pain of betrayal to the joy of loving again, he had built a life he never thought possible. "Do you ever think about the past?" Todd asked Emma, his voice soft. She looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. I do, sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. I like to focus on what's in front of us. Todd smiled at her, his heart swelling with love. You've been incredible, you know that. I'm just here to love you, she said with a gentle smile, and I always will be. As time passed, Todd continued to grow in ways he never expected. He became more confident in his work, more grounded in his relationships, and more certain of his own worth. Suzanne's betrayal, once the defining moment of his life, no longer held any power over him. He had risen from the ashes of that pain and built something beautiful. And as the years went by, Todd and Emma's bond only deepened. They faced challenges together, grew together, and created a life full of love, laughter, and endless possibilities. Todd had finally found peace, not just within himself, but in the life he had created with the woman who loved him unconditionally. And in that peace, he realized that he didn't need to look back any longer. His future was brighter than he could have ever imagined. Years passed, and Todd's life became a testament to resilience, healing, and the incredible power of love. He and Emma had built a beautiful family, one that was filled with laughter, support, and the occasional moment of chaos that came with raising children. They found joy in the little things, the spontaneous dance parties in the living room, the family outings, the quiet evenings spent curled up on the couch, talking about their dreams for the future. Todd often reflected on his journey, from the dark days of heartbreak and betrayal to the light-filled moments he now shared with Emma. He had learned so much, not only about love, but also about himself. The pain of the past had been a harsh teacher, but it had shaped him into a stronger, more compassionate man. He had learned to forgive, not just Suzanne, but also himself. And through it all, he realized that healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't a single moment of closure, but a series of choices made every day. Todd had chosen to rise above the pain, to move forward, and to create a life filled with purpose and meaning. One day, as Todd was going through some old boxes in the attic, he came across a letter from Suzanne. It had been years since he had thought about her, but the letter brought back a flood of memories, some painful, some bittersweet. He opened it, his hands trembling slightly as he read her words. I know you've probably moved on, but I need you to know that I regret everything. I'm not the same person I was back then. I've changed. I can only hope that one day you can forgive me, truly forgive me. You deserve so much better. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight of sincerity that Todd hadn't expected. He closed the letter, taking a deep breath. There was no anger left in him, no bitterness. There was just peace. He had forgiven her, and now he truly understood what that meant. Todd showed the letter to Emma that evening, and she watched him carefully as he shared his thoughts. It's strange, Todd said softly. I thought that if I ever heard from her again, I'd be angry or hurt. But I don't feel that way. I feel like I can finally let go of it all. Emma wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. You've come such a long way, Todd, and you've built something beautiful here. That's what matters. Todd nodded, his heart full. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself. As Todd and Emma sat together in their cozy home, surrounded by their children and the warmth of the life they had created, Todd couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the love he had found with Emma. Gratitude for the lessons of the past, even the painful ones. And above all, gratitude for the strength to move forward. In that moment, Todd understood that life wasn't about avoiding the pain. It was about learning from it and allowing it to guide you to something better. And as he looked around at the life he had built, he knew that he had done just that. The years that followed were filled with happiness and fulfillment. Todd's relationship with Emma grew deeper, their love stronger, as they faced the challenges of life together. Todd's past no longer haunted him. It had become a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. As he looked at his children, laughing and playing together, Todd couldn't help but feel proud of the life he had created. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way, and that was enough. In the quiet moments when he allowed himself to reflect, Todd knew that he had finally found the peace he had been searching for. The pain of betrayal, the heartbreak, and the struggles had all led him here, to a place of love, strength, and resilience. And in that peace, he realized that he had truly healed. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Todd looked around at the faces of his loved ones, the people who had been with him through the highs and lows, the ones who had stood by him when everything seemed lost. And in that moment, he knew that all the pain, all the suffering had been worth it. It had brought him here, to this moment of pure, unshakable happiness. As he looked at Emma, his partner, his confidant, the woman who had helped him heal and grow, Todd felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had found love again, a love that was real and lasting, a love that had given him a family and a future. "Thank you," Todd whispered to her, his voice full of emotion. Emma smiled at him, her eyes full of understanding. "We've been through a lot together, haven't we?" Todd nodded, his heart full. "And I wouldn't change a thing." And as they sat together, surrounded by the people they loved, Todd knew that his journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but he was ready for them, because he had learned the most important lesson of all. No matter what life threw at him, he had the strength to overcome it and the love to carry him through. As Todd looked out the window of their home, the golden glow of the sunset casting long shadows across the yard, he realized how far he had come. The past, once a place of pain and regret, had faded into the background, replaced by the present, a present full of warmth, love, and promise. For the first time in a long while, Todd felt completely at peace. He no longer carried the weight of Suzanne's betrayal, nor the scars it had left on his heart. The man who had been broken by her actions had transformed into someone stronger, more resilient. And now, as he stood at the edge of the life he had built with Emma, he could finally see the beauty in everything that had come before. "I used to think I couldn't move on," Todd said quietly to himself, his voice almost lost in the evening breeze. "But I did, and I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm thriving." That night, as Todd lay in bed beside Emma, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led him here. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak, it had all felt insurmountable at the time. But now looking back, it seemed almost like a distant memory. He had learned, he had grown, and most importantly, he had found peace. "Do you ever think about what we've been through?" Todd asked, his voice soft, as he turned to face Emma in the dim light of their bedroom. Emma smiled and ran her fingers through his hair. "Of course, but I think the best part is that we're still here, together. We've been through so much, but we've built something beautiful." Todd nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "You've been my rock. I don't know what I would have done without you." "I'm just happy to be with you," Emma said, her voice filled with sincerity. "We're stronger than ever." Todd knew that no matter what the future held, he and Emma would face it together. He had learned that the road to healing was not linear, and that true strength came not from avoiding pain, but from embracing it and using it to become a better person. And with Emma by his side, Todd knew he could face anything. The years ahead would bring their own challenges. Life was never without its obstacles, but Todd was no longer the man he once was. He had faced the darkest parts of himself, had come to terms with his past, and had emerged stronger for it. Together, he and Emma had created something beautiful, a love that had been tested but never broken, a life full of joy, of laughter, and of love. And no matter what came next, Todd knew that he was ready for it. In the days that followed, Todd and Emma continued to build their future. They worked together, grew together, and laughed together. They shared their hopes and dreams for the future, and they supported each other through everything that life threw their way. They were no longer just surviving, they were thriving, building something that would last a lifetime. Todd often found himself thinking back to the message from Suzanne, the one that had come out of the blue all those years later. He had been surprised by the apology, but it had also served as a reminder of how far he had come. He had forgiven her, and in doing so, had freed himself from the past. "I don't think about her anymore," Todd said one evening, his voice steady. "I've learned what I needed to learn, and now I'm focused on the future. And the future is right here with you." Emma smiled, her heart full, and that's all that matters. And so, Todd and Emma continued to walk down the path they had carved together. a path filled with love, hope, and the kind of strength that only comes from overcoming adversity. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, had been left behind. What mattered now was the present and the future that they were building, side by side. As they sat together one evening, watching the sun set over their home, Todd couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over him. He had survived the storm, and now he was living in the calm. "I'm grateful for everything," Todd said, his voice thick with emotion. "Me too," Emma replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. And as they sat in the stillness of the moment, Todd knew that no matter what came next, he would face it with strength, with love, and with the unshakable belief that the best was yet to come. As time went on, Todd continued to learn new things about himself. He had always been the type of person who kept his emotions close, bearing his deepest fears and insecurities beneath a calm exterior. But after everything he had been through, after Suzanne's betrayal and the love he had found with Emma, Todd realized that it was okay to be vulnerable. It was okay to open up and share his emotions. One evening, as they sat in their cozy living room, Emma turned to him and asked, "What do you think has changed the most about you since everything happened with Suzanne?" Todd smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the wisdom that had come from years of healing. "I think I've learned to let go of things, to not carry the weight of the past around with me. I've realized that there's no point in holding on to anger or resentment. It doesn't help anyone." Emma nodded, understanding the depth of his words. "That's one of the things I love about you. You've been through so much, but you've never let it change who you are in a negative way." Todd looked at her, his heart full. "And you've been the reason I've been able to heal. You've given me the love and support I needed to move on. I'll always be grateful for that." As Todd reflected on his journey, he knew that forgiveness had been the key to his healing. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing Suzanne's actions. It simply meant freeing himself from the grip of her betrayal. It had taken time, effort, and self-reflection, but Todd had found the strength to forgive her. He had learned that forgiveness was not a one-time decision, but a continuous process. It wasn't about the person who had wronged you. It was about taking back control over your own life and no longer allowing the past to dictate your present or future. And as Todd looked at his life with Emma and their children, he realized that forgiveness had allowed him to move forward and build a life far more beautiful than he could have imagined. A life filled with love, joy, and fulfillment. One day, as Todd and Emma sat in the park with their children, Todd found himself lost in thought. His life had become so full and happy that it almost seemed surreal. He had gone from a man who had been broken by betrayal to a man who was now living a life he had once only dreamed of. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Todd asked Emma, his voice soft. Emma smiled, her hand gently brushing his. "All the time. It's hard to believe, isn't it? We've been through so much, but here we are, stronger than ever." Todd nodded, his eyes focused on their children playing in the distance. "I never would have imagined that I'd be here, with you, with them. After everything that happened, I thought I'd never find happiness again." "You did," Emma said, her voice full of warmth. "You found it with me, with our family, and that's the best part of it all." As the days turned into months and the months into years, Todd's life continued to evolve. He had found peace, love, and happiness, and he had learned to cherish every moment of it. The future was no longer a source of fear. It was something he looked forward to with hope and anticipation. Through it all, Todd never lost sight of the lessons he had learned. He had learned that life wasn't always fair, but that didn't mean it wasn't worth living. He had learned that pain was a part of life, but it didn't have to define him. And he had learned that love, true love, was worth fighting for. And in the quiet moments when he found himself reflecting on the past, Todd knew that he had made the right choices. He had chosen to forgive, to let go, and to move forward. And now, with Emma by his side, he was living a life he could have never imagined. Years later, when Todd's children were grown and starting families of their own, Todd found himself thinking back to the beginning of his journey. He thought about the man he had been, the man who had been betrayed, broken, and lost, and how far he had come since then. He had found love again, had built a family, and had learned that happiness was not something that came easily, but something that was earned through perseverance and self-love. Todd knew that no matter what the future held, he was ready for it. He had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. As he watched his grandchildren play in the yard, Todd couldn't help but smile. He had found peace, he had found joy, and he had found a love that would last a lifetime. Todd sat in the quiet of his office, his gaze fixed on the family photo on his desk. The picture showed Emma, their children, and even their grandchildren, all smiling and laughing together. It was a reminder of just how far he had come. The man who once believed that his heart had been shattered beyond repair was now living a life he had never thought possible. But as peaceful as the present was, Todd couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He had learned to let go of his past, but every so often, fragments of it resurfaced, like flickers of a bad dream he couldn't quite shake. The phone call from Suzanne years ago, the apology she had offered, and the unresolved questions that had never been answered, still lingered. "I wonder if I'll ever really understand it," Todd muttered to himself. He knew it was a question that would never fully leave him. Suzanne had betrayed him in the most public of ways, and yet there had been no explanation, no real closure. It was something he had simply accepted, but as the years passed, the weight of unanswered questions remained always present, though not overwhelming. He looked up from the photo, blinking as if trying to force his mind back to the present. He had built a good life, a strong family, a successful career, and a deep connection with Emma. And yet a small part of him would always wonder, why did Suzanne do it? Why did she betray him when everything seemed perfect? Todd's phone rang, breaking his train of thought. It was Emma calling to remind him that they had plans to meet with their oldest daughter, Mia, for dinner. Todd smiled, grateful for the reminder. It was moments like these, simple, quiet moments with the people he loved, that made all the hardship worthwhile. "Hey, I was just thinking about you," Todd answered, his voice warm. Emma laughed softly. "Were you? I'm sure it's a thought I can't compete with. We're meeting Mia for dinner, remember?" "How could I forget?" Todd replied, smiling. "I'll be ready in 15. He ended the call and grabbed his coat. As he headed out the door, he felt a renewed sense of appreciation for the life he had built. He may never fully understand the pain Suzanne had caused him, but it no longer defined him. What mattered now was his family. What mattered now was the love that surrounded him every day. Dinner with Mia was filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of easy conversation that only family could bring. Todd watched as his daughter spoke animatedly about her work and her own growing family. There was so much life in the world and so much to look forward to. Every moment with his children felt like a gift. And as he listened to Mia, Todd's thoughts once again turned inward. He had built a life that was full of love, purpose, and meaning. But there was still something that tugged at him, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. The pieces of his past still floated at the edge of his consciousness, not as painful memories, but as unfinished business. "What's on your mind, Dad?" Mia's voice broke through his thoughts. Todd blinked, then smiled, feeling a little guilty for losing himself in his own thoughts. "Nothing, just thinking about how lucky I am," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You, your mother, your siblings. It's all just perfect." Mia smiled, her eyes shining with affection. "It is, isn't it?" As they left the restaurant later that evening, Todd found himself reflecting on the road that had led him here. He had been through so much: pain, betrayal, heartache. But now he had a family that loved him and a life that was whole. He could look back on his past and feel a sense of peace, knowing that he had risen from the ashes. Emma, who had been by his side through it all, reached for his hand as they walked to the car. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, filled with concern. Todd smiled at her, grateful for her unwavering presence. "I'm more than okay. I'm exactly where I need to be." The next morning, Todd woke up early, as was his habit. He had always been a morning person, finding peace in the quiet hours before the world fully came to life. He stepped out onto the porch, the cool morning air filling his lungs, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly free. Freedom wasn't just the absence of pain or the ability to move on from past mistakes. It was the ability to live in the present, to enjoy the simple joys of life, and to appreciate the love that surrounded him. It was the realization that the past could never define him. Not anymore. "I've made it," Todd whispered to himself, a soft smile spreading across his face. "I've made it, and I'm finally living." In the days that followed, Todd continued to embrace the present. He spent more time with his family, took on new challenges at work, and spent evenings with Emma, reflecting on the life they had built together. He had once feared that he would never heal, that the wounds from his past would never close, but now those fears seemed so distant. He had not only healed, he had thrived. Todd's life was no longer defined by the betrayal that once tore him apart. It was defined by the love he had found with Emma, the lessons he had learned, and the strength he had gained from it all. Every day he woke up with a sense of gratitude for the life he had built, a life that was full of hope, love, and the knowledge that, no matter what came next, he was ready to face it. As the months went by, Todd felt an even deeper connection to his family. He and Emma continued to grow together, building a relationship based on mutual respect, love, and understanding. There were challenges, of course, as there always were in life, but Todd knew that with Emma by his side, they could handle anything. But one evening, as they sat on the porch sipping wine and watching the sunset, Todd's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat. After everything that had happened, he never expected to hear from Suzanne again. But there it was, a message that would change everything. "Can we talk? I need to explain," the message read. Todd stared at the screen, his mind racing. What could Suzanne possibly want after all these years? What explanation could there be for the things she had done to him? "I think it's time," Todd whispered to himself. Emma, noticing his change in demeanor, looked at him with concern. "What's wrong?" Todd hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "It's Suzanne," he said softly. "She's reached out." Emma's expression softened, and she took his hand in hers. "What are you going to do?" Todd took a deep breath. For a moment, he thought about ignoring the message, letting the past remain in the past. But then he realized that for his own peace of mind, he needed closure. He needed to hear what Suzanne had to say, even if it didn't change anything. "I'm going to meet her," Todd said, his voice steady. "I need to know the truth." The meeting was set for the next afternoon. Todd arrived at the small cafe where Suzanne had suggested they meet. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that he had to face whatever came his way. He sat at a table near the window, his eyes scanning the crowd as he waited. Then he saw her. Suzanne walked through the door, looking almost the same as she had all those years ago. The years hadn't been kind to her. There was a weariness in her eyes, a sadness that hadn't been there before. She hesitated for a moment when she saw Todd, then made her way over to the table. "Hi," Suzanne said, her voice hesitant. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Todd nodded, his emotions a mix of anger, confusion, and curiosity. "What do you want, Suzanne?" She took a seat, folding her hands in front of her. I need you to understand. I need to explain why I did what I did." Todd's eyes narrowed. "Explain? After everything you put me through, you want to explain?" Suzanne winced but didn't look away. I know it was wrong, but there's more to the story than you know. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't even realize how much damage I was causing until it was too late." Todd clenched his fists under the table. He had heard enough apologies over the years to fill a book, but something in Suzanne's voice caught his attention. There was sincerity there, an honesty that he hadn't expected. "What do you mean?" Todd asked, his voice low. Suzanne took a deep breath, and for the first time, Todd saw her as vulnerable. "I was scared," she said, her voice breaking. "I was scared of losing everything, of losing my own identity. And when things with us started to feel like they were slipping, I did something horrible. I thought it would make me feel better, but instead, it tore everything apart." Todd sat in stunned silence. This was not the explanation he had expected. "You're saying that you didn't mean to hurt me? You didn't mean to ruin our lives?" Suzanne shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, I didn't. I was selfish. I made a mistake, and I've regretted it every day since. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth." Todd felt the weight of her words settling in his chest. Part of him wanted to lash out, to remind her of the pain she had caused him. But another part of him, one he had worked hard to build over the years, wanted to find some kind of understanding, some peace with this. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" Todd asked, his voice hoarse. "I was too afraid," Suzanne whispered. "I thought you would never forgive me, and maybe you never will. But I had to tell you, Todd. I owe you that much." Todd took a deep breath, his mind swirling with emotions. Was this the closure he had been waiting for all these years? Was this what he needed to finally move on? The conversation stretched on for hours, filled with more apologies, explanations, and painful truths. Todd listened, but as the meeting came to an end, he realized something. Suzanne's actions, her betrayal, no longer had the power to control him. The truth, whatever it was, didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was how he chose to live his life moving forward. As he left the cafe, Todd felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He didn't need to forgive Suzanne in order to heal. He had already done that on his own, through the love and support of those who truly cared for him. Suzanne's apology was important, but it wasn't the key to his peace. The key had always been within him. When he returned home to Emma, she was waiting for him with a concerned look on her face. "How did it go?" Todd smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "It's over," he said simply. "I have everything I need right here." He gestured to Emma and their children, the family he had fought so hard to build. And for the first time in a long time, Todd knew that his journey had come full circle. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He was free, free to love, free to live, and free to move forward. Months passed, and Todd found a renewed sense of joy in his life. The pain of the past no longer haunted him as it once did. Emma, his steadfast partner, had helped him heal in ways he never thought possible. Their relationship blossomed in a way that was both soothing and empowering. Together, they navigated the world with renewed purpose, grounded in mutual respect and love. But even as he moved forward, Todd couldn't help but revisit his memories of Suzanne. Though he had found peace, there were moments when the old feelings of betrayal resurfaced, like waves crashing against the shore. He had forgiven Suzanne, but did she ever truly understand the weight of what she had done? Did she ever grasp the lasting impact of her actions? One evening, as Todd sat in the garden with Emma, watching the children play, he received another message. It was from Suzanne. She wanted to meet again. His heart skipped a beat. Why now? What more could she have to say? Emma noticed his change in expression. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. Todd hesitated before responding. "It's Suzanne. She wants to meet again." Emma's face softened, but there was no trace of jealousy or fear in her eyes. Instead, there was understanding. "Are you going to go?" Todd took a long breath, the weight of the decision heavy on his chest. "I don't know. Part of me wants to leave it behind, but another part of me feels like there's something more that needs to be said." "You've already forgiven her, Todd. You don't owe her anything," Emma said, her voice calm but firm. "But if you need closure, if this will help you move forward, then do it." Todd nodded, grateful for her support. It wasn't easy, but he knew that the decision was his to make. He had already come so far, and he knew that no matter the outcome, he would continue to grow. The day of the meeting arrived. Todd was both nervous and curious about what Suzanne would say this time. When he arrived at the designated spot, a quiet park with a view of the lake, he found her already waiting. Suzanne looked different now, more composed, but there was a certain sadness in her demeanor that still clung to her. "Hi," Suzanne greeted him, her voice gentle. "Hi," Todd replied, sitting down across from her. He noticed the way her eyes avoided his, as though she were unsure of how to begin. "I know this is probably unexpected," Suzanne said, her voice trembling slightly, "but I've been thinking about everything a lot lately." Todd said nothing. He simply watched her, waiting for her to explain. "I know that what I did to you was unforgivable. I ruined your life in so many ways, and I've carried that guilt with me every single day." Suzanne paused, her lips trembling as she fought to hold back tears. "But I want to tell you that I've changed. I've been through my own journey, and I've tried to make amends in the best way I can. I don't expect you to forgive me." "You keep saying that," Todd interrupted. his voice more forceful than he intended. You keep saying you don't expect forgiveness, but do you even know what you're asking for? Do you even understand the devastation you caused? Suzanne looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. I do. I understand now. I didn't understand then, but I do now. I've lost so much because of my mistakes. Friends, family, peace of mind. I've lived with the consequences of my actions, and I will for the rest of my life. Todd sat back, his mind racing. Was this the same woman who had lied to him, manipulated him, and broken his heart? He searched her face for some sign of remorse, some evidence that she truly understood the depth of the hurt she had caused. For a moment, he saw a flicker of sincerity, but he couldn't help but wonder, was it too little, too late? I've tried to change, Todd. I've tried to make things right with the people I've wronged, Suzanne continued, but I know that I can't change what happened between us. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Todd sat in silence for a long time, contemplating her words. He had expected anger, resentment, maybe even the same defensiveness he had seen before. But this was different. Suzanne seemed vulnerable, broken even. He realized in that moment that he didn't need an apology from her. He had already forgiven her in his heart. It was his own peace he had fought for, not hers. And yet he couldn't deny that hearing her say it, hearing her acknowledge the pain she had caused, was somehow freeing. I think you've been carrying this guilt for too long, Suzanne, Todd finally said. His voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it that surprised both of them. But it's time for you to let go, for both of us. You don't need to keep punishing yourself. Suzanne looked at him, eyes wide with disbelief. But how can I ever make it right? Todd smiled, though there was no joy in it. You can't, but that doesn't mean you can't move on. We both can. As the conversation came to an end, Suzanne stood up, her face etched with both relief and sorrow. She had said what she needed to say, and now it was time for her to leave. Todd watched her walk away, feeling a strange sense of closure that he hadn't expected. He had come here seeking something. Answers, understanding, maybe even redemption. But what he found instead was something far more powerful. Peace. Peace within himself. When he returned home, Emma was waiting for him. He didn't need to say much. The look in his eyes said it all. She smiled, walking over to him and pulling him into a tight embrace. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Todd kissed her forehead, feeling the weight of the past lift off his shoulders. "It's over, Emma. It's really over." And with that, Todd knew that he had finally turned the page on his past. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that true healing comes not from seeking revenge, but from finding peace within oneself. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. And with Emma by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. As Todd and Emma continued their life together, the shadows of the past seemed to fade further into the distance. Todd had long come to terms with Suzanne's betrayal, but a strange sense of resolve had taken root within him. He had faced the storm and emerged from it stronger, his bond with Emma growing deeper every day. Yet life had a way of surprising him, even now. One night, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Todd received an unexpected message. It was from Suzanne. The message was short but cryptic. "I need to tell you something important. Please, just one more conversation. You deserve the truth." Todd's heart raced, his immediate reaction being one of annoyance and confusion. What more could she possibly have to say? Hadn't they already closed that chapter? His thoughts swirled, but one thing became clear. This was something he needed to hear. Perhaps after everything, this final conversation would be the closure they both needed. Emma noticed his hesitation as he stared at the phone screen. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, offering him a silent reassurance. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," she said softly. Todd took a deep breath, the weight of the decision heavy on his chest. He looked at her, seeing nothing but understanding and love in her eyes. He knew what he had to do. "I'll go, but only because I need to be sure. Not for her, for me." The meeting was set for the following evening. Suzanne had chosen a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, a place that felt distant enough to make their conversation private, yet close enough for Todd to feel safe. When he arrived, Suzanne was already waiting, her face pale as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She looked nervous, but there was something else in her eyes, something darker, more burdened than before. "I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance to say this," Suzanne began, her voice trembling. "But after everything, I need you to understand something. I wasn't the only one who was wrong in our relationship." Todd's pulse quickened. He hadn't expected this. Was she implying that there was more to the story? He leaned forward, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" Suzanne's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long while, Todd could see the vulnerability in her. "I wasn't just hiding the affair, Todd. There were others involved. People who you never saw. People who manipulated everything." Todd's mind reeled. The affair? That had been painful enough, but now she was suggesting a larger conspiracy? His thoughts flooded with a mixture of disbelief and confusion. He needed more. He needed to understand. "What are you talking about?" Todd asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside. Suzanne exhaled sharply, looking away. "There were forces working behind the scenes, people who wanted to see us fail. My choices, they weren't just my own. They were influenced. The affair, the lies, the manipulation, it wasn't all me." Todd's mind struggled to process the revelation. The complexity of the situation began to unfold before him, each layer revealing something more shocking than the last. His suspicions had been right. There had always been something off about Suzanne's behavior, something that had never quite added up. But this was a new twist. Who were these people? What was their role in his suffering? Suzanne looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt you. But I got tangled up in something much darker than I ever could have imagined. They controlled everything. My choices, my actions. It was all part of a bigger plan." Todd was silent, trying to process the flood of information. He couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal, not just from Suzanne, but from the unknown people who had been pulling the strings. What kind of world had he been living in, where nothing seemed real, nothing seemed genuine? "Who are they? Who did this to you?" Todd demanded, his voice rising with a mix of anger and desperation. "I can't say," Suzanne whispered, her voice filled with fear. "I don't even know who they are exactly, but I know this. They've been watching you. They've been watching us for a long time. And everything that happened, our relationship, the affair, it was all a part of their plan." Todd stood up abruptly, his mind racing. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. I don't even know what to believe anymore." Suzanne reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to stop him. "Please, Todd, I'm begging you. You need to understand the full extent of this. If you leave here tonight without knowing the truth, it could be worse for both of us." But Todd, overwhelmed by the weight of her words, turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Suzanne behind. His mind was spinning, the lines between truth and manipulation blurring with every step he took. Who could he trust now? Later that evening, as Todd sat alone in his apartment, the weight of the conversation sank in. Suzanne's confession rattled him to his core, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much he didn't know. Who were these people? What did they want from him? And most importantly, why had they chosen to destroy his life? It wasn't long before Emma joined him, sensing his turmoil without needing to ask. She sat beside him, her presence a calming force amidst the chaos of his thoughts. "Do you believe her?" Emma asked, her voice gentle but firm. Todd ran a hand through his hair, his eyes focused on the dimly lit room. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe her, but the other part of me feels like I'm just being dragged deeper into something I can't control." Emma placed a hand on his. "Whatever it is, Todd, you don't have to face it alone." Todd looked at her, her unwavering support grounding him. "I don't want to go down this path. I've already been through too much, but I can't just ignore what she said. I have to know the truth." With Emma's encouragement, Todd decided to investigate further. He couldn't let Suzanne's cryptic words haunt him. The truth, no matter how painful, was something he had to uncover, if only for the sake of his peace of mind. The next few days were a whirlwind of confusion and introspection for Todd. He couldn't shake the thoughts of Suzanne's cryptic words and the strange, unsettling feeling that had taken root inside him. Every time he tried to focus on something else, his mind kept wandering back to the unanswered questions. Who were these mysterious figures controlling everything? Why had they targeted him? And most importantly, why had Suzanne, the woman he once loved, been drawn into their web? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Todd began to investigate in a way he had never done before. The investigation into his wife's betrayal had been a personal journey, a journey filled with emotion and heartbreak. But this was different. This was something darker, more insidious than anything he had ever imagined. First, Todd revisited all the moments in their relationship that had seemed off, the oddities and inconsistencies that had never quite made sense. He pulled out old text messages, reread emails, even scrolled through old photos. His mind sifted through everything with renewed intensity, but the more he dug, the more disjointed the pieces became. It was as if everything in his life had been orchestrated for some unknown purpose. His first major breakthrough came one evening, while he was revisiting the security footage from the days leading up to his wedding. He had been hesitant to revisit it, but something told him he needed to. After hours of searching, his eyes widened as he spotted something unusual. A figure standing outside his home late at night. The person was wearing a dark hoodie, their face obscured by shadows, but Todd recognized the distinct silhouette. It was the same figure who had been lurking around his wedding venue in the weeks before the ceremony. Todd's heart raced as he rewound the footage again. The figure hadn't just been standing there, they were watching him, watching his every move. This wasn't just a random passerby or a harmless stranger. It was as if they were waiting for something, waiting for him to make a move. The unsettling realization began to form in Todd's mind. Whoever these people were, they were still watching him. And they had been watching him long before he ever realized. But who was this person? Why had they been following him? And more importantly, what was their connection to Suzanne? Todd's curiosity, mixed with the burning need for answers, pushed him to the next step. He began searching through public records, old acquaintances, anyone who might have had a connection to the mysterious figure Suzanne had mentioned. It wasn't long before he stumbled upon something strange, a name he hadn't heard in years, one that was connected to his family's business dealings from years ago. The name was linked to a powerful underground network that operated in the shadows, manipulating events to suit their needs. It was a name tied to some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city. Todd's gut twisted. Was it possible? Could these people have been involved all along? With this new information in hand, Todd set out to track down the truth. He wasn't sure who he could trust anymore, but he knew one thing. He couldn't back down now. Suzanne's words had opened a door, and there was no going back. He decided to confront the people who might have answers. A meeting was arranged, though Todd wasn't entirely sure what to expect. He had no idea whether the people he was about to meet would help him or lead him further into the abyss. As he entered the dimly lit room, his pulse raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of a clock ticking in the background. Sitting across from him were two individuals, professionals in their own right, but there was something unsettling about the calmness in their demeanor. "We know who you are, Mr. Todd," one of them said, his voice cold and calculated. "We know what you're looking for, and we know that you've come here for answers." Todd's eyes narrowed. "I'm not here to play games. I want to know what's going on. I want to know who's been pulling the strings in my life." The second individual leaned forward, their eyes sharp and piercing. "You think you're the only one caught in this web? You think you're the only one who's been manipulated?" Todd clenched his fists, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Who are you? And why are you doing this?" For the first time, the two individuals exchanged a brief look, as though debating whether they should reveal the truth. Then with a sigh, the first person spoke. "You've been chosen, Todd. You've been chosen because of your connection to Suzanne. And now it's time for you to understand. You've been part of a much bigger plan than you realize." Todd felt his stomach drop. "What plan? What are you talking about?" The second individual stood up, walking to the window and staring out into the night. "The world is not as it seems. The people you trust, the people you love, they're all part of a game. A game we've been playing for years. And you, Todd, are one of the key players. Todd stood frozen, the weight of their words crashing over him. He had thought he was just a man trying to piece together the shattered remains of his life. But now he understood. He wasn't just a victim. He was a pawn in something far more dangerous. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, but the picture they revealed was one he never could have imagined. The following days were a blur. Todd couldn't escape the revelations, couldn't ignore the chilling truth that had come to light. The people who had manipulated Suzanne, who had orchestrated the affair, the betrayal, were part of a much larger system. A system that had ensnared them all, including Todd, in their web of lies and deceit. His world, once so carefully constructed, had been upended. The trust he had placed in the people around him had been shattered, leaving only the harsh reality of betrayal and control. But what could he do now? How could he fight against something so vast, so insidious, without losing himself in the process? As Todd sat alone in his apartment, staring out into the cold night, a sense of resolve began to form within him. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't undo the hurt and the pain, but he could fight back. He could take control of his life once again, and no matter what it took, he would bring the truth to light. He would expose the people who had orchestrated this web of manipulation, and he would make them pay for everything they had done. Todd had always considered himself a man of reason, someone who believed in logic and fairness. But the chaos of the past few days had forced him to confront a new reality, one where emotions and instincts often guided his actions. He had learned that truth, no matter how elusive, was often buried beneath layers of deceit and manipulation. And now, it was up to him to dig it out. The game had changed. He was no longer just trying to understand the motivations behind Suzanne's betrayal. He was now part of a much bigger story, a story that reached into the highest echelons of power, a story that had its roots deep in the shadows of society. And Todd wasn't sure if he could escape the web that had been spun around him. Determined to find a way to expose the truth, Todd returned to the people who had first given him a glimpse into this dark world. The room where they met was as cold and sterile as the first time, but now Todd was no longer intimidated by their presence. He had learned something about himself in the past few days. He wasn't just a pawn. He had power of his own. "I've been thinking," Todd began, his voice steady and composed, "about what you told me, about the system, the people you're working for. But I'm not just going to sit back and accept this. I want to know everything, and if I have to bring down this entire system to get answers, then that's exactly what I'll do." The two individuals exchanged a silent glance before the one who had been speaking earlier finally responded. "You've got more fight in you than we expected, Todd. But be careful. The world you're stepping into is dangerous. It's not just about revenge, it's about survival." Todd's heart pounded in his chest. He knew this would be no easy task, but now more than ever, he was ready to fight back. "I don't care about survival," Todd said with a cold resolve. "I care about the truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what's been happening, no matter the cost." 84. The plan began to take shape in the days that followed. Todd started pulling together everything he knew, every scrap of evidence, every piece of information he had uncovered. It wasn't enough to confront the people behind Suzanne's betrayal. He needed to go deeper, to expose the system itself, to make sure that no one else would fall victim to the same manipulation. But Todd soon realized that his fight wasn't just against those who had wronged him personally. It was a fight against an entire network of powerful individuals, a network that had been carefully constructed over years, if not decades. These were not just shadowy figures. They were connected to the very fabric of society, people who controlled industries, politics, and wealth. As Todd dove deeper into this dark world, he felt himself growing more and more isolated. The people who had once been close to him, his friends, his colleagues, began to distance themselves. They couldn't see what he had uncovered, couldn't understand the dangers that loomed over them. Todd had to walk this path alone. The pressure was mounting. Todd knew that every move he made brought him closer to danger, but he also knew that there was no turning back. He was committed now, whether he liked it or not. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could make sure that no one else would suffer the same fate. 85 days turned into weeks, and Todd's search for the truth became all-consuming. He uncovered more about the shadowy figures who had manipulated his life than he ever thought possible. They were everywhere, hidden in plain sight, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And now they were watching him. He could feel it. But even as the walls seemed to close in around him, Todd found himself gaining a strange sense of control. He had learned how to move in this new world, how to read the subtle signals, how to anticipate the moves of the people who were manipulating him. He had learned to think like them, and it was this new mindset that helped him discover the most shocking revelation of all. Suzanne had not just been a pawn in their game. She had been one of them. She had known about the system all along. She had been complicit in the manipulation, feeding Todd false information and steering him toward the wrong conclusions. But why? Why had she done it? Todd's mind raced, trying to piece together the final parts of the puzzle. 86. The answer came to him one night as he sat in his apartment, staring at the wall, lost in thought. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about power. Suzanne had been groomed for this. She had been chosen as a key player in the system, a way to keep Todd close while they executed their plan. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Suzanne hadn't been the victim, she had been the orchestrator. With this knowledge, Todd's resolve hardened. He would confront her, not as a broken man seeking answers, but as someone who knew the truth. He had seen through the layers of lies, and now it was time to confront the woman who had once been his partner. The night of the confrontation arrived, and Todd's heart was heavy with a mixture of anger and sadness. He had loved Suzanne. He had trusted her, and now he was about to face the reality that she had never truly been on his side. When Suzanne walked into the room, Todd's eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. She seemed different, colder, more distant, as though she had become someone else entirely. "Todd," she said softly, her voice betraying no emotion. "I didn't expect you to be here." "I think we both know why I'm here," Todd replied, his voice steady but filled with an intensity that took Suzanne by surprise. "I know everything, Suzanne. I know what you've been hiding. I know who you really are." Suzanne's eyes flickered for a moment, then hardened. "You don't understand, Todd. You never did." Todd's anger flared, but he kept his composure. "I understand more than you think. You've been playing a game, Suzanne, and now it's over." Suzanne stepped closer, her face inches from his. "You think you can expose me? You think you can bring down everything I've worked for? You're nothing but a pawn, Todd, just like everyone else." Todd's heart pounded in his chest, but he held his ground. "Maybe, but this pawn has had enough." With those words, Todd turned and walked out of the room, leaving Suzanne behind. The final confrontation had taken place. The truth had been exposed, and now Todd's journey, his fight, was far from over. Todd walked out into the night, his mind reeling from the encounter. The cold air stung his face, but he barely noticed. His entire world had shifted in the span of a few minutes. Suzanne wasn't just a betrayer, she was a manipulator, a player in a game he never even realized he was a part of. His instincts told him to leave, to disappear into the darkness and never look back. But something deep inside him burned with a different desire: justice. He wasn't just going to walk away from this. He had come too far, learned too much, and now he had leverage. Suzanne's arrogance had been her downfall. She had underestimated him, just like everyone else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The recording app was still running. Every single word she had just spoken, her admissions, her threats, her lies, had been captured. Todd clenched his fist. This wasn't over. Not yet. The next few days were a blur. Todd knew he had to move carefully. He spent hours listening to the recording, analyzing every word, every nuance. He pieced together a strategy, a way to expose Suzanne and the entire system she was a part of. But he also knew he was being watched. He felt it in the way strangers lingered too long outside his apartment, in the way his phone glitched at odd moments. They knew he was onto them, and they wouldn't let him go so easily. Todd started making backups of everything. He uploaded files to encrypted drives, sent copies to anonymous email accounts, and even hid a USB stick in a place only he knew. If something happened to him, the truth wouldn't die with him. As he worked, a strange sense of clarity washed over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was in control. He had been on the defensive for so long, questioning, doubting, fearing. But now he was the one setting the pace. And then, just as he was finalizing his plan, a knock echoed through his apartment. A slow, deliberate knock. Todd's breath caught in his throat. They had come for him. He moved quickly, stuffing his laptop into his backpack, grabbing his phone, and heading to the window. If they thought he was going to just sit there and wait, they were wrong. Another knock, harder this time. Todd yanked the window open, his mind racing. He was on the 3rd floor, a risky jump, but he had no choice. Just as he swung one leg out, his door burst open with a crash. "Stop right there!" A deep, commanding voice filled the room. Todd turned slowly, his muscles tensed, ready to fight or flee. A man in a dark suit stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Behind him, 2 more figures, their faces shadowed by the dim light. Todd's pulse pounded in his ears. He had prepared for this. He had known it was coming. The man stepped forward. "We need to talk." Todd narrowed his eyes. "I don't think we have anything to say to each other." The man smirked. "Oh, but we do. You've been busy, Todd, digging where you shouldn't, uncovering things that are best left buried." Todd squared his shoulders. "You're too late. I already sent everything out. If anything happens to me, the truth goes public." The man sighed. "We're not here to kill you, Todd. If we wanted that, you'd already be dead." Todd's fingers tightened around his phone. "Then what do you want?" The man's smile widened. "An offer, one you won't refuse." Todd's jaw clenched. He had expected threats, violence, even an attempt to make him disappear. But an offer? That was something he hadn't anticipated. He studied the man in the suit, trying to gauge his intentions. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes held a sharpness that sent a clear message. This was someone used to control, to power, someone who was always 10 steps ahead. Todd exhaled slowly. "I'm listening." The man's smirk didn't fade. "Good. You've proven yourself resourceful, Todd. You've seen things most people never do, and you're still standing. That means something." Todd crossed his arms. "And?" The man took a step closer. "And we don't want to waste that potential. You think you've uncovered the full picture, but you haven't. Not even close." Todd narrowed his eyes. "I know enough. Do you?" The man tilted his head slightly. "You've scratched the surface, sure, but there's more, so much more. The kind of knowledge that can change the world, the kind of power that few ever get access to." Todd's pulse quickened. He didn't trust this man, not for a second, but he couldn't deny the curiosity that stirred within him. "And let me guess," Todd said, his voice laced with skepticism. "You want to share that power with me?" The man chuckled. "Not quite, but we are offering you a choice. Walk away now, forget everything you've learned, and live a quiet, ordinary life. Or," he paused, letting the tension build, "you come with us, and you see how deep the rabbit hole really goes." The room felt suffocatingly small. Todd's thoughts raced, weighing the options. He had come so far, uncovered so much. Could he really just walk away? Pretend none of this had happened? He glanced at the door, his way out. But deep down, he knew there was no real escape. Even if he ran, they would find him. The only way forward was through. He met the man's gaze. "And if I say no?" The man's smirk faded slightly. "Then you'll be left alone. No more threats, no more surveillance. But you'll always wonder, won't you? Wonder what you missed, what you could have been." Todd's chest tightened. He hated being manipulated. But damn it, the man was right. Finally, he spoke. "I want answers." The man nodded approvingly. "Then you'll get them. But understand this, Todd. Once you step through that door, there's no going back." Todd exhaled sharply. "I already crossed that line a long time ago." The man's smile returned. "Then let's begin." Todd followed the suited man out of his apartment, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The hallway was empty, eerily silent. As they descended the stairs, Todd noticed a sleek black car waiting outside, its tinted windows reflecting the dim streetlights. One of the silent figures opened the door, gesturing for Todd to enter. He hesitated for just a moment before sliding inside. The interior was dark, the air thick with an unspoken tension. The man in the suit joined him, sitting across from him with a calm, almost amused expression. "You made the right choice." Todd's fingers curled into fists. "We'll see." The car pulled away from the curb, the city lights blurring past as they drove into the unknown. And Todd knew. This was only the beginning. The silence inside the car was suffocating. Todd kept his eyes on the man in the suit, trying to read him, to anticipate his next move. But the man's face remained unreadable, a mask of quiet confidence. Todd shifted in his seat. "Where are we going?" The man smirked. "Someplace where you'll get the answers you're looking for." Todd clenched his jaw. He had spent so much time chasing the truth, but now that he was this close, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. This wasn't just about Suzanne anymore. This was something bigger, something that reached far beyond a single betrayal. The car moved smoothly through the city streets, eventually heading toward the outskirts. The buildings became sparse, replaced by long stretches of dark road. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows inside the vehicle. After what felt like an eternity, they turned onto a secluded driveway. At the end of the path stood a massive, windowless building, cold, industrial, and unwelcoming. The car came to a halt, and the man gestured toward the door. "After you." Todd hesitated, but he knew there was no turning back now. He stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his feet. The air was thick with anticipation. He wasn't sure what he would find inside, but he was ready to face it. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor. Todd stepped inside, his senses on high alert. The walls were lined with security cameras, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. The suited man walked ahead, leading him through the sterile hallways. They passed doors with no labels, no handles, just cold metal, concealing whatever secrets lay behind them. Finally, they reached a room at the end of the corridor. The man pressed a code into the keypad, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Todd stepped inside. The room was small, almost claustrophobic. A single table sat in the center, with a folder resting on top. The man motioned for him to sit. "This is where it all begins." Todd eyed the folder warily. "What's in there?" The man leaned against the wall, his smirk returning. "Everything you thought you knew about Suzanne." Todd's stomach twisted. He reached out, hesitating for just a moment before flipping the folder open. Inside were photos, documents, emails, evidence, but not just of Suzanne's betrayal. There were names, people Todd had never heard of, bank transactions, offshore accounts, coded messages, and then, at the very bottom, a picture of Suzanne, but not as he had ever seen her before. She wasn't just cheating on him, she was working for someone. Todd's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The deeper he read, the colder his blood ran. Suzanne hadn't just lied to him. She had played him from the start. Their relationship, their love, it had all been a carefully crafted illusion. The man watched him, his expression unreadable. "Now you understand." Todd swallowed hard. "What is this? Who are these people?" The man exhaled slowly. "A network, one that operates in the shadows. Manipulation, deception, control. It's what they do. And Suzanne, she was one of their best assets." Todd felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. "So what? She was assigned to me? My entire relationship with her was just a mission?" The man nodded. "Exactly." Todd's head spun. He had suspected betrayal. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. His entire life with Suzanne had been a lie. A cold rage settled in his chest. He had been used. Every moment, every touch, every whispered word. It had all been calculated, and he had fallen for it. Todd clenched his fists. "Why me?" "What did they want?" The man crossed his arms. "That's what we need to find out." Todd's pulse pounded in his ears. He had spent so much time looking for answers, and now they were finally here, laid out before him in black and white. But the real question was, what was he going to do about it? He looked up at the man, his jaw tight with determination. "Tell me everything." The man's smirk widened. Now we're getting somewhere. Todd sat in that room for hours, absorbing every detail. The deeper he went, the more twisted the story became. Suzanne wasn't just a cheater. She was an operative. Her job had been to infiltrate his life, gain his trust, and keep him under control. But why? What did he have that they wanted? The man in the suit didn't give him all the answers, only enough to keep him hooked, enough to make sure Todd understood the gravity of the situation. And then came the real question. What do you want to do next? Todd stared at the folder, then back at the man. The old Todd would have walked away, would have tried to rebuild his life and forget everything. But that Todd was gone. He met the man's gaze, his voice steady. I want revenge. The man's smirk turned into a full grin. Good. Todd stepped out of the facility into the crisp night air. His mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. He had spent so much time searching for the truth, and now he finally had it. But knowing the truth wasn't enough. He was going to burn their entire operation to the ground. The road ahead was dark, uncertain. But for the first time, Todd wasn't afraid. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the storm that was coming for them. And Suzanne? She had no idea what was about to hit her. The car pulled up beside him, and the suited man gestured for him to get in. Todd took one last look at the empty road ahead. Then he opened the door and stepped inside. As the car drove off into the night, one thing was certain. This was only the beginning.